Injury is very much in the focus, with football talking about concussions and things like that. We have a major movie now coming out soon talking about concussion, and of course we've also now seen rules happening in soccer and heading, and the effect of heading and shaking your head and how that can affect in the long term. Because the thing about head injury is it can be an instantaneous skull fracture or a brain bleed, or it can actually be something that's long term, which we're seeing in football, which is concussion, which leads to dementia. Or we're also seeing that within the brain itself, the pituitary gland can be affected. And if with the pituitary gland, we actually affect the hormone levels, and it's those hormone levels that can actually lead to the feeling of suicidal, really immense depression. So if you do know somebody that's actually had a bang to their head and they are actually feeling really depressed, you know, maybe 2 or 3 months after the actual impact, it would be a really good idea to recommend that they go to their doctor to actually have their hormone levels checked, because that can actually be disrupted inside our brain. So it's not always, and giddiness inside our brain, well actually behind our ears, we have gyroscopes which keep us in balance. And obviously if we actually bang our head, we can sometimes introduce air bubbles into those gyroscopes, and you can create a sense of vertigo and giddiness. So this is not necessarily a traditional brain injury, but it's actually because we've had a head impact. And those air bubbles and things like that can actually be fixed if you actually get referred to the right professional. So around the world, there's been quite a lot happening in helmet standards. In Europe, we've had probably the biggest change. We've had the European standard increase by about 20% in protection, and in fact the level was so great that in fact from the 1st of January of next year, many riding organisations are requiring riders to change their helmets because the level was considered to be a little bit too low with the existing European standard. Over in America, we actually have the STM is actually being updated, and we're having the 2015 version being released on the 4th of January. Now, from a standards point of view, it's a major change. But actually from a rider's point of view, it's actually very little change. Okay, so you may have come across this, I think in Helmet Awareness Day. Dover put out a press release about the fact there was a new upcoming standard, but there are no rules and regulations that are changing over here. And the big change was, in the past, every head was assumed to be the same weight. It was assumed to be 11 pounds in the American system. In Europe, they actually had a different idea. They said that small heads weighed less than big heads. Okay, so we actually had a variety. And what's happened with this update is that American standards bodies have decided to follow the European system and actually get away from all heads weighing the same to actually us having different weights of heads. So why does that matter? Well, most helmets use bubbles, microscopic bubbles of air inside them, which when you land on the ground, they burst. Now, when we're making the bubbles to burst with an 11-pound weight, we set them at a medium density. But of course, if you've actually got a child with a light head falling on those medium density bubbles, sometimes there's not enough pressure from enough weight from the head to actually burst the bubbles. And so in fact, the helmet does nothing. Now, on the contrary, if you've got somebody with a heavy head, because they've got so much weight in their head, they actually can burst those medium density bubbles with ease. And they actually burst all the bubbles and run out of bubbles, and so therefore they come to a sudden abrupt stop. So the people that are really affected by this change are people that have a head size of 6.5 or below, or 7/5/8 and above. And you can imagine that really there's a lot of people who actually show horses that really fall in the middle size. So although you'll actually be seeing there will be an updated standard, there really is no panic for the majority of people. And certainly it brings into the whole aspect of multiple safety standards on helmets. Now, a lot of people look at a standard and say, well, you know, if it meets the standard, it's going to protect me. Well, the problem we have is that if we were trying to build a helmet to protect against all accidents, it would be about 3 inches thick. And you can imagine that a lot of people feel like they've got bobbleheads on at the moment, or with a 3-inch thick helmet, you definitely feel like you were a mushroom. And so a lot of standards bodies decide that they're not going to cover every accident. So if you don't cover every accident, you're going to eliminate certain ones. And each standards body decides that there is a different type of risk that they're going to eliminate. So, for example, in America, it's considered to be really helpful to get people to wear helmets by allowing there plenty of ventilation. Okay? So, one of the things they do is they don't do one of the tests that are done in Europe, in the European standards, which is to simulate a horse stud actually kicking you in the head. Okay? Now, because you don't have to worry about the stud, you can make the holes in the helmet bigger. And so therefore, because it's not being protected against. Now, if you are deciding what type of helmet you want, the answer, the real question you have to say is, well, what accident am I going to have in my helmet? Because then I can make sure that I've chosen the helmet that's been tested for that type of accident. And one of the things that we do as Charles Owen is, we say, it's really tough to know what type of accident we're going to have. So why don't we test it to many different safety standards? And each one of those safety standards actually test for different type of accidents. So the more standards you have, the more coverage you have within the helmet. The other thing that we've seen is, for example, with helmet cams have been something that have been a feature, again in the news, and brain injury. And one of the things that was discovered was that that actually a projection from the helmet can actually lead to you jarring and turning and spinning your brain. And that's one of the things that you find that within some of the standards, that although we have a projection on the front, some of the standards require us to make it so it's flexible. So if you actually land on the front of your visor, the visor will collapse and not actually turn your brain, which of course is the problem that we have with helmet cams, is a projection on the outside. And certainly when we look at fast speeds, like racing and things like that, normally a lot of people actually want to have the visor not there at all. Because the faster the speed you're running along the ground, the more energy there is to spin your brain, and that's actually what causes the problem. A little bit like the heading in soccer. So that's some of the things that's happening. In the future, there's some really good news for the equestrian world, is that the European Commission have decided that they want to invest $3.5 million worth of research money into 4 different sports. Horse riding being one of them, skiing being another, and cycling and motorcycling. And that research project, which is started in September and runs for 3 years, will actually help us to develop the next generation of helmets and helmet standards. Because as we can see with soccer and we can see with football, what was considered to be okay in the past is now not necessarily considered to be okay for the future. And as we expect to live longer, these mental diseases that build up actually are becoming a bigger problem for society. Now, one of the things that we also do is get Anne to in her new helmet, and we use this as a way of, if you are looking to buy a helmet, the sorts of things that retailers should be considering when we do fit. Now, more what we are learning about within, okay. I've got the new helmet up here. It's okay. All right. Oh, you're in the head. Okay. What we're finding is that the scalp on your skull is a very essential part to actually protect your brain from spinning. We have this thing, like often with hunting people who have the traditional type helmets, they say the trouble with these modern helmets is they move. Well, actually part of the protection is that if the scalp is moving, that's actually what we want. And some of those traditional hunting helmets that were steamed to the shape of the skull actually ended up stopping the helmet actually sliding over the skull because it was actually located to the bottom. So again, sometimes with the dial fit helmets, as they become more effective, sometimes you can get it whereby they can again lock underneath the base of the skull and actually stop the helmet moving. So although we always are looking for a good fit, something that means the helmet's not moving on your head. I mean, you've been to jumping competitions where you've seen kids who do jumps, and every time they do a jump, they have to push their helmet up, right? Well, of course, what happens is that the helmet will actually move out of place and expose a part of the head. And of course, if you do fall down and the horse kicks you, you want to make sure the helmet's in place. So a good fitting helmet, but we also have to make sure that we don't disable the body's natural defenses. The other thing I suppose I'll do a little plea on is helmet straps. Lots of times when you see people, you actually see them dangling 2 or 3 inches below their chin. And I did have to investigate an accident of a young lady down in Wellington who was practicing at home jumping. And the horse came to the jump, refused, she fell backwards. She landed on the back of her head and the helmet worked, but what happened is when she landed on the back of the head, she had to strap really loose and the helmet lifted up at the side, okay? And then the horse kicked her in the temple area, okay? And she ended up having to have the side of her skull replaced by titanium. Now, luckily, she didn't die, because that actually area is very, very vulnerable to that area. And the good news is, 1 year after her accident, she ended up deciding to emigrate by herself to Europe to go and start a new career over there. So she actually made a total recovery, but it did remind me of when I see straps which are dangling, that it's not just telling people you're not doing the thing right, that there actually is a reason why you need the strap to stop the helmet tipping in that sort of situation. So let's have a go with time. So whenever I do a helmet fit, the first thing I do is actually measure the head, okay? Because the thing is, with Anne, I don't know whether perhaps she's cut her hair, and so therefore she actually needs a smaller size, or whether all these online mentoring sessions you're now doing is actually making your head grow, right? So we need to go up a size. Okay. So it's always worthwhile checking, the size. And so,
or I just have a fat head.
So what we're doing is we're measuring just above the eyebrows, just above the top of the ears, and really what we're wanting is to go over the bump at the back. Okay. So when the brains can't be contained within inside, that they actually come out on the bump. And that bump is really important because that bump is what helmet manufacturers use to stop helmets tipping forwards. Okay? Now, some people don't have a bump on the back. Okay? And we see with children, with the medical advice that's changed, where babies were always laid face down, and so the pressure was on the side of the head. Nowadays, the medical advice is to have babies lay on their back. So we're getting a lot more pressure on the back of the head. So we're finding that people's head shapes sometimes are changing, and we're getting less bumps on the back. Okay, all right, so we take this. And of course, when you're doing your hair, putting hair inside, it's really important, especially if you have an oval head, that you don't actually twist the ponytail, because remember, the hats go up in an eighth, and an eighth is the diameter of your head. So if you twist your ponytail into being a half an inch thick, it's meaning you're needing to go up 4 sizes of helmet to actually get the helmet to fit. Okay? So when you flip your ponytail up, really you want to push it just a little bit forward. If you don't have a bump on the back, then actually putting a little French braid, 3 or 4 French braids on the back, actually can be helpful for the helmet fit because it creates the bump, right? So if you don't have a bump, you can use the hair to create a bump, but if you do have a bump on the back, try to keep your hair as flat as possible. Okay, so when we're trying a helmet on, at the beginning, it wants to feel like a new pair of boots, right? It wants to feel firm, snug, but not tight, no pressure crease. Okay, so when we're putting it on, the first time, okay, we'll put that hair up. That's it. Okay, so you can see I put it on 2 or 3 times because the helmet is only a 1/16 of an inch difference between a whole helmet size. So it's tiny amounts. So a bit like when you put boots on, as you pull them on, you stretch the leather and it becomes more comfortable. The same happens with a helmet, the one we're putting it on. And so therefore I'm feeling around the bottom edge, feeling for any pressure points or gaps. So a little bit. So what's with the helmets are designed so they actually have a floating system which will allow the helmet to actually reshape itself. Okay? So we can just pull that. Does that mean a little bit from that? Okay. Okay, so I want you to hold your head really still, okay? All right, straight, okay. And what I want to do, okay, and then I want you to hold it still, okay? All right, so that's what we're looking for. We want to have it whereby the helmet isn't sliding down. And when people often talk about the visors causing problems with the nose, actually what it is the helmet slides down, and it's the edge of the helmet that comes down and breaks people's noses. Then we look at putting the chin strap underneath. And because I know you're going to be doing a lot of talking this afternoon, I won't try and do it too tight. Sometimes I get paid extra by the parents to do it a little bit tighter. So we want to have it whereby it's a finger width. Sometimes when I ask is if a young person wants to have it nice and loose, as long as when they're screaming, as they fall off, they can tighten up the strap, okay, then it's okay. All right. And then the more important bit is that we need to come to the back of the helmet where there is the harness. A lot of people forget about the back, but remember, it's this harness that's going to grip below the base of the bump at the back and stop the helmet tipping forwards. So It's a really important part of gripping. And actually, when it's snugged in, it really makes the helmet feel much more secure, much deeper at the back. Okay. Good. So it's so with the new European standard, I think we've now got a little more protection built in this year. You know, as we get older, right? Unfortunately, age does have an effect on our body, which tends to mean it tends to go away, and so we have our brains tend to have a little more fluid, and with the more fluid inside our brain, it actually means it can move more easily and spin more easily, and so we actually have it. So we find that age, as people get older, people become more susceptible to a head injury. As you have a head injury, you're more susceptible to more injury in subsequent falls, and also alcohol is really bad for the brain. But the good news is that exercise is incredibly beneficial for the brain. Three times a week, 20 minutes of mild aerobic activity. In fact, there was a study done in Montreal with pregnant women, and half the pregnant women decided to continue with exercise, and half of them decided to refrain from exercise because they wanted to look after their baby. When the doctors and researchers analyzed the babies when they were born, they found that the babies from the mothers that exercised had more mature brains than the mothers that decided not to exercise, because exercise generates lots of good chemicals, and the other thing you need for those chemicals is greens, okay? Remember our great-grandmothers told us that greens were an important part of the diet, like broccoli and cabbage and things like that. The sulfur in those vegetables actually help us to actually generate the chemicals that make our brain repair itself and keep us active and on top of the game, which I think is part of your secret.
Having a good helmet is a big part of it.
Okay. Well, hopefully you found that interesting and an update, and I'm sure that next year, when we have some of the initial results from the research project over in Europe, we'll keep you updated and make sure you know what you need to do to look after yourself. If anybody has a helmet that they've got with them and it's kind of moving, be happy to help them with that.
Any questions? Anybody have any questions for Roy while he's here?
Are you the person that receives helmets when they get broken? Like if someone sends back a Charles Owen, are you that person?
I do look at my phone. We have about 3 accident reports a day that come in. And in fact, those go through to my phone, so I look at those. And in fact, one of the things that we're doing as part of this research project is we've got about 600 helmets with those accident reports that we're going to try and analyze to try and work out how we can improve.
Mine's one of them, and I got a helmet after it broke, so it was only 2 months old and it cracked in half.
Right. It's the whole concept is that comfort zone within cars. Is that the idea is that a helmet destroys itself and uses the energy of the blow rather than going through into your brain.
Is there a certain length of time you suggest I one? Like if you haven't fallen off, then the helmet still fits well.
Okay. A good question. In fact, there was a study done last year on bicycle helmets to look at saying, was there an age after which the styrofoam, and they actually tested helmets as old as 26 years old, and they actually found that the degrading was like 1/3% per year of age, which was insignificant, right? So actually the age of the styrofoam isn't necessarily the problem, but what you do find is as you wear the helmet and the sweat goes into the lining, you find that the helmet starts to move, okay? And also, occasionally you drop things and, you know, things happen, like you fell off, you know, and you landed on your back, but you didn't quite know whether you hit your head. So, after about 5 years of regular use, right? I mean, obviously a show helmet will perhaps last a little bit longer, but the thing is that it's actually just the everyday wear that actually tends to break down the helmet. But actually, if you keep the helmet in the box, it doesn't actually really degrade. It's amazing the materials we use inside how. And in fact, there was a study done by the Jockeys Guild recently with Kentucky, and they actually did one of our jockey helmets. And even after 4 impacts, it still met the standard, even though it had degraded by about 30–40% in its protection. But actually, the helmets inside really do stand up. So that's why, although we encourage people, because you never know when you want the ultimate protection, right? You know, okay, that's small fall, but then when you have the big fall, you want to make sure. So that's why we do an accident replacement program to encourage people, and that lasts for the first 3 years of use of the helmet. So if you do, you go on the site, you fill in the form, and then you get a little memo back coming advising you what the discount you can have, because keeping your protection topped up is worthwhile.